On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States declared war. 4 days later, Germany declared war on America, and the conflict became a truly global struggle. But what if that never happened? What if the United States stayed out of World War II? Our alternate history begins in 1941. In this timeline, Japan decides that attacking Pearl Harbor is too dangerous. Instead, it focuses on British and Dutch colonies in Southeast Asia while carefully avoiding American territory. President Franklin Roosevelt condemns the invasions and increases economic aid to Britain and China. But without a direct attack on the United States, Congress refuses to declare war. America remains officially neutral. That decision immediately changes the conflict. Britain still receives weapons, food, aircraft, and ships through American aid programs. But without millions of American soldiers joining the war, Britain must carry far more of the burden itself. The Soviet Union also continues receiving supplies from the United States, but in smaller quantities and through more politically controversial agreements. Meanwhile, Nazi Germany concentrates almost everything on defeating the Soviet Union. In our timeline, Germany eventually had to defend France, Italy, North Africa, and the skies over Europe from growing American power. Here, there is no American army preparing to land in France. There is no massive United States bombing campaign. And there is no Operation Torch in North Africa. The British continue fighting Germany and Italy around Egypt and the Mediterranean, but their manpower is stretched dangerously thin. By 1942, Axis forces push deeper toward the Suez Canal. If Suez falls, Britain's route to India and the Middle East becomes far more difficult to defend. But Germany's greatest battle is still in the East. The Soviet Union suffers catastrophic losses, yet it does not collapse. Its enormous territory, industrial relocation, and vast reserves of manpower keep it alive. Without American troops threatening Western Europe, however, Germany can send more aircraft, tanks, and soldiers east. The Battle of Stalingrad becomes even bloodier. This time, the German army avoids complete encirclement and withdraws before being destroyed. The Soviet advance begins later and moves more slowly. By 1944, Europe is trapped in a brutal stalemate. Germany controls most of continental Europe, while the Soviet Union slowly pushes westward at an enormous human cost. Britain remains unconquered, protected by the English Channel and the Royal Navy, but it lacks the strength to liberate Europe alone. Then the war begins to fracture. Germany's economy is exhausted. Resistance movements spread across occupied Europe. Allied bombing from Britain continues damaging German industry, though on a much smaller scale than in our timeline. Hitler demands more soldiers, more executions, and more desperate offensives. Inside Germany, military officers begin considering a coup. In 1945, Hitler is assassinated by members of his own government. The new German leadership immediately seeks peace with Britain. London faces a terrible decision. It can continue the war and risk allowing the Soviet Union to occupy all of Europe, or negotiate with a German government that promises to withdraw from Western Europe while continuing to fight the Soviets. Britain chooses negotiation. Germany releases France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway under governments heavily influenced by London. But Poland, the Balkans, and much of Eastern Europe remain battlefields. The Holocaust has still occurred. Millions have already been murdered, and without Allied armies liberating camps from both East and West, many atrocities continue longer and remain hidden until after the war. There are also no Nuremberg trials as we know them. Some Nazi leaders are prosecuted by Germany's new government, but others escape, hide, or are protected because they are considered useful against the Soviet Union. Europe enters an uneasy peace. Germany survives as an authoritarian military state in the center of the continent. The Soviet Union controls territory farther west than before, but it has not conquered Berlin. Britain leads a fragile alliance of Western European countries. The Second World War does not end with a clear victory. It simply transforms into a new Cold War. But this Cold War has three sides: Britain and Western Europe, Germany and its remaining satellite states, and the Soviet Union. What about the Pacific? Japan expands into Southeast Asia and captures valuable oil-producing territories. Because it never attacks the United States, Washington does not immediately enter the conflict. American submarines and aircraft do not destroy Japan's merchant fleet. There is no Battle of Midway, no island-hopping campaign, and no American occupation of Japan. China continues resisting, but without direct American military intervention, the war lasts much longer. Japan builds a vast empire stretching across Korea, parts of China, Indonesia, and several Pacific islands. Yet controlling that empire becomes nearly impossible. Guerrilla wars spread across Asia. Millions die from fighting, famine, occupation, and forced labor. By the late 1940s, Japan is economically exhausted. Rather than being defeated by atomic bombs, it begins losing its empire through rebellion. The United States still develops nuclear weapons, but much more slowly without the urgency of total war. The Soviet Union may become the first country to test an atomic bomb, or Germany may continue its own nuclear research long enough to create one. By the 1950s, the world is divided among several armed superpowers. There is no United Nations in its familiar form. No American-led reconstruction of Europe, no NATO, no occupation that transforms Germany and Japan into democratic allies. The United States remains wealthy and protected by two oceans, but increasingly isolated from a world it chose not to reshape. Eventually, America would be forced to confront the consequences. It may enter a later war against Japan, Germany, or the Soviet Union. But by then, its enemies could possess nuclear weapons, larger empires, and decades of preparation. America staying out of World War II might save hundreds of thousands of American lives in the short term. But it could leave behind a far more divided, authoritarian, and dangerous world. So, would American neutrality have prevented an even larger war, or merely delayed it until the stakes became much higher? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this alternate history scenario, subscribe to What If for more stories about how one decision could completely rewrite the world. Thanks for watching.